Hi there, it's Ben from World Have Your Say. This is a download from the BBC. If you want to read our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts. Here's today's programme.
We've heard the news from the BBC. Now it's your turn.
You can post on facebook.com/World Have Your Say or get in touch via Twitter at BBC_WHYS.
Welcome to World Have Your Say.
Hello, I'm Chloe Tilley. Welcome to World Have Your Say. Well, he was seen as an idol to millions. A Paralympic gold medalist, he rewrote history by being the first amputee to compete at the Olympic Games. But now Oscar Pistorius is facing a murder charge after his girlfriend was shot dead in his house in the early hours of this morning. Police are releasing little information other than to say they had previously been called to Oscar Pistorius' house over claims of a domestic nature. So how much of a role do South Africa's gun laws play in this tragic story? We're here live for the next hour, taking all of your calls, tweets and texts.
I'm Ayuna One from South Sudan, and this is BBC World of USA. To take part in this live debate, call country code 442031624242.
You can also join the conversation at facebook.com/World Have Your Say, and you can tweet us using the hashtag WHYS. Well, let me introduce you to a number of guests who are here with us for the next few minutes to discuss this, developing story. Sarah Britton is a blogger in Johannesburg, joins us on the line now. And Paul Bester is a policeman from Cape Town, but joins us on the line from Johannesburg today. Welcome both of you to World Have Your Say. I want to begin first by speaking to Nick Erickson from BBC Africa. Yourself, South African Nick. Just bring us right up to date with where we are with this story, because it's quite confusing, isn't it?
It is quite confusing, and it's been developing very quickly, as you alluded to, during the day. Where we are now is that Oscar Pistorius is sitting in a jail in Pretoria. He is charged, it looks likely to be charged with murder tomorrow when he appears in court tomorrow morning. He will apply for bail. We're being led to believe that the police will oppose that application for bail, and it all began at around about 4 o'clock this morning, South African time, when police were called to his residence in Pretoria in a security complex, high security complex, residential complex in Pretoria, where his girlfriend was shot dead. Initial reports suggested that Oscar Pistorius had shot her in error, believing her to be a robber or a burglar. And as the day progressed, so the police had staged an extraordinary press conference in which they said this suggestion that Oscar Pistorius was acting in mistaken self-defense didn't originate from the police, and as far as they were concerned was mistaken, and that he would be charged with murder. So that's where we are. An icon in South Africa, South Africans struggling to digest the news, I would imagine.
Absolutely. What sort of messages are coming into you today?
Well, we've been getting messages at BBC Africa from across the continent, mostly shock on Focus on Africa radio today. Cape Townians in particular were asked how they felt about developments. That was earlier this afternoon. They expressed shock and they spoke to the BBC about what they thought, these incidents said about violent crime in South Africa. We've heard such things as it's a very tragic story. We don't know what caused this. So reflecting the confusion of a rapidly developing story. Some were saying that they were lamenting the fact that they are surrounded by crime everywhere they go. And I suppose inevitably a discussion of this story about Oscar Pistorius ventured into discussions around safety and security. Someone said, I'm not a big fan of guns at all, but this increased violent crime highlighted by this story has meant that I've considered buying a gun. The thought has crossed my mind. On our BBC Africa Facebook page, we've been getting reactions as well. People talking about guns being licensed to people who are mentally fit to handle them well. And that it's very sad news what we're hearing. One person, Kolezi Longwe, says, I just don't believe this about Oscar Pistorius. There's more to this than meets the eye. Thorough investigations need to reveal the truth.
Nick, stay with us. Sarah, I want to bring you into the conversation. Just out of interest, hearing that people are getting in touch saying, I want to get a gun or I do have a gun. You living in Johannesburg, do you have a gun?
Definitely not. And this is the kind of story that reminds me why I don't.
What have you been seeing today and hearing from people? It must be a country deeply in shock.
Definitely. I saw the first tweet. I heard about it on Twitter this morning. I immediately felt as though I'd been kicked in the gut. And I think that's an experience that lots of people would have shared, because Oscar is an icon. He's one of those golden heroes. He's very much loved in this country. We're all very proud of him. So to have this kind of shocking thing come through on Valentine's Day of all days, it was the sort of story that not even the most fettered imagination from Hollywood could come up with. So I think we're all in a state of shock. And it's been interesting to track the response during the day, because Trevor Noah, a very well-known South African comedian who's based in the US, made what a lot of people felt was a tasteless joke. And it's interesting how, when things like this happen, often the first response is to start joking about it. And the response to the jokers was a lot of anger. I don't think South Africans generally feel comfortable with joking about this right now.
When we talk about guns and gun laws in South Africa, for many people, they won't realise staggering statistics that in 2010, it was the latest year that the UN had stats for South Africa and saying 15,940 people were murdered in South Africa. That equates to 40 people every day. You can kind of understand why so many people do feel they need to arm themselves.
Oh, yes, you definitely do. And one of the debates I'm picking up on Twitter is why this is being made a discussion of crime and a culture of fear rather than a discussion of domestic violence. And that is an interesting direction that the story has started to evolve in, because domestic violence and violence against women is a very, very it's a massive topic of discussion in South Africa right now. So for a story to come along like this and evolve as quickly as it has done starts to raise all sorts of questions as to the role of guns and violence in domestic violence, which is also a massive problem in this country.
Sorry to interject, Sarah. Hi, it's Nick here from BBC Africa. I mean, we've mentioned those murders annually, the numbers of murders annually, almost 16,000. We were speaking to a gun campaigner on BBC Africa earlier on from Gun Free South Africa, who was saying, well, 40% of those 16,000 murders annually are related to firearms. And she was saying, throwing in another number into the mix, that if you own a firearm, you're 4 times more likely to have a gun used against you. So her point, I suppose, was firearms actually don't offer you any level of protection against the proliferation of violent crime in South Africa.
Well, what is interesting is how the debate as it's unfolding in social media platforms isn't really about gun control. And it's interesting that it isn't about gun control, that there's all sorts of speculation, what really happened here. But I think we're so inured to violence in this country that it's difficult for us to argue about gun control the way we might do in America. And our gun laws are strict.
They are.
Well, let's bring in, now we're talking about gun laws, let's bring in Paul Bester. He's a policeman from Cape Town, so I guess at the sharp end of this issue. Paul, in your experience as a policeman, how much do you think the gun laws essentially play a role in these kind of tragic stories?
Well, let me, good evening, Mr. Say hi to the people, but let me say this. As a policeman, let me take it back one step. You were putting figures out of 16,000 people murdered in South Africa. Last year, more than 300 South African policemen were killed on duty. Now, when I say on duty, I mean they were carrying guns. And let's just say, as a policeman, you carry your gun every day, you use it regularly, you go for shooting practice, more than the normal public would, if you understand what I'm saying. So, and they are killed. 300 of them whilst being on duty. We once would suppose they would be able to protect themselves with the firearms that they have at their disposal. So my answer to your question is yes, I think we have very good gun laws in South Africa, but I do think that guns give you a false sense of security. For myself, my firearm, if I'm not working, it's in the safe. If something which should happen to me whilst I'm off duty, I will be in trouble. And that's the problem with the gun in South Africa, is that if it's not on your own person, it's got to be in the safe. That's the gun law. Let's say you follow the law, it's there. When you're asleep, it's not under your cushion or under the bed. It's packed away. If something happens to you at night, you're going to die. Farmers die whilst being attacked, and they have 5, 6, 7, 8 guns. And of those 16,000 that died, let me just put it correctly, is they die with guns like AK-47s, R5s, for which you will not be able to get a gun license in any case. It's stolen firearms. So yes, South Africa's gun laws is good, but guns don't give you protection if you have a gun.
I think it's important. I think it's very important to stipulate and to stress that it is very, very difficult to get a gun in South Africa legally. I mean, the laws in South Africa are very, very difficult and very, very stringent. It's designed to make it difficult for you to acquire a firearm.
But then by the same token, I was also reading that many people who do go through that very rigorous process of getting a lawful firearm then have their houses broken into, and that firearm is then stolen and then used by criminals.
Yeah, I mean, the number of unlicensed firearms in South Africa, nobody can put a number to them. It's difficult to assess, but it's safe to say that there are many in circulation.
Let's bring in Ken Borland, who's a freelance sports journalist, joins us on the line from Johannesburg. Ken, welcome to World Have Your Say. You've been listening patiently. What do you want to add?
Well, yeah, I think it's, the talk about whether the discussion should be centering on gun control or on domestic violence, it really depends on the evidence that comes from the case. It's way too early to say in which direction this discussion should go. What we do know is that it's an awful tragedy for both families concerned. And, I would just agree with what's been said by Paul Bester, that a gun is not going to give you any security whatsoever. And many people, myself included, that by owning a gun, you're actually making yourself a target of criminals.
I agree.
Sarah?
Yes, well, I think we've all had experiences with violence. And when I was married, I slept in a bedroom with 6 guns in a gun safe. And I must say, I felt incredibly unsafe. Because what happens in many cases in break-ins in this country is people actually ask you where your guns are, and they want the safe. And there's an assumption that you own guns and that you have guns available for the taking. So, yes, I would agree that to an extent, guns do make you a target. And this is the awful quandary we live in a country where there is so much violent crime, is that sometimes the steps we take to protect ourselves also make us more vulnerable, and we end up hurting those closest to us.
So, Paul, as a policeman, how do you reverse this? Because many people would say, if this was a domestic dispute, obviously we don't know the situations, but if a gun hadn't have been in that house, then maybe no one would have got shot. How does South Africa move forward to become a safer place? Has it gone too far? Does everyone have to have a gun now?
Well, I don't believe that everyone needs to have a gun now. What I do believe is, and if we are talking about, the story's issue, Oscar's issue, is that if he was having a gun in his premises, he got it in a legal way, he was licensed. Nobody knows. Everybody, acts different when you are angered or under stress. And we don't say that he did it. I'm just saying if it was him, he could have had a gun 2 weeks ago and was a fine, normal person. Something triggered him and something happened. It happens to everybody. So he had a gun in his house and something happened. What I'm trying to say is this. In South Africa currently, we're having a high violent sort of crime pattern. When there's farm murders, people are burned with hot irons, boiling water. They are strung behind the bakkie for, light delivery vehicle for 4 or 5 kilometers. It's excessive, extreme violence. Things that you see in horror movies are happening today in South Africa. And I think there will be a turning point. People are shouting in South Africa and wanting a referendum to put back the death penalty. I don't think the death penalty is the correct way to go. That's my personal opinion, not a police opinion. That the death penalty will not solve the violent crimes. China has got death penalty, and they execute 1,500 people per year, and still they have violent crimes and smuggling. So it won't deter that. What I do think is it starts at home. I do think that due to the socio-economic problems in Africa, unemployment, no housing and issues, people are born angry and they grow up angry, and this anger are vented in that kind of way. That's how I feel. And I think if government should assist and social communities assist is sort out the job problem in South Africa, housing problem and service delivery, and I think we would be a better country as well if that is tackled and addressed.
Paul, really interesting to say that people are born angry and grow up angry. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us on World Have You Say. Nick Harrison from BBC Africa, Sarah Britton, a blogger in Johannesburg, Ken Borland, freelance sports journalist in Johannesburg, and Paul Bester, we heard there, a policeman from Cape Town. Ngazi in Ivory Coast got in touch via Skype. I heard the news this morning from the radio. I was so sad. Actually, the policy of gun control should be extended to South Africa and even strengthened. Paul in Ohio posted on Facebook, I have heard there is a lot of crime and a lot of gun ownership there, just like here, and terrible accidents will happen. And Chirosama in Zambia posted on Facebook, Oscar really had our jaws dropping during the Olympics. We're so proud of him. I just pray this is all a misunderstanding. If you want to carry on this conversation, you can, as ever, facebook.com/World Have Your Say. But for the remainder of the programme, we're going to turn our attention to a story which broke earlier this week, of 10 Jewish women who were arrested on Monday by Israeli police for praying at Jerusalem's Western Wall. They were wearing prayer shawls and traditional skull caps. And for people who don't understand the significance of this, Orthodox rules say that prayers at this site is only allowed for men, and only men are allowed to dress in this way. I'm getting some shaking heads in front of me in the studio. Let me introduce the guests and they can set me straight, because they're obviously disagreeing with me. Rabbi Laura Janner-Klausner is a rabbi to the Movement for Reform Judaism, and Rabbi Dr. Moshe Freedman from the United Synagogue, both with us. Laura, you were shaking your head. Set me straight.
Well, the good news is we were both shaking our heads. So you've got an agreement at the beginning, which is a wonderful way to start.
Absolutely.
At the Wailing Wall, which is the holiest site for us, both men and women can pray.
But not in the same place.
But not in exactly the same place, and they are divided according to gender.
Sorry, that's what I meant. They can't pray in the same place.
But we can both play there, but in a very different way. And what happened this week when those women were detained, they weren't detained by the Israeli police in the first instance. They were detained by the authorities at the Western Wall for wearing, as you said, prayer shawls. Now, the objection to wearing prayer shawls by some Jews is that it's seen as a male-only garment, whereas in some women, and it's a tradition that's happened for thousands of years, in fact, have taken on wearing prayer shawls because out of a love and a devotion to prayer, and that enhances prayer.
You say seen as something that men should wear.
So there are rabbinic authorities that would say that it's a male-only garment, and there are some, including our most famous commentator, who disagreed, and his daughters used to wear them.
Now, before I bring in Rabbi Dr. Moshe Freedman, who I know is very keen to come in, I want to bring in, first of all, Anat Hoffman, who's the Executive Director of the Israel Religious Action Centre. And Anat was one of the women who was detained on Monday, so I think it's only fair to let her explain what happened to her. So, Anat, explain exactly what happened on Monday.
So shalom, good evening. On Monday, it was the first day of the month of Adar, which is the month we're supposed to rejoice in, and 200 women came to the wall. The idea was to pray together and celebrate the new month of Adar. Some of us wear talitot, not all of us. Talitot is the plural of talit, of a prayer shawl. So some of us were wearing, some are not. Some were wearing phylacteries, which is unusual, but some were not. And we were praying together, and we had a wonderful prayer celebrating the new month. It's a women's custom to celebrate the new month together. Something about the monthly cycle and women somehow jives. And we had special guests this time. We had the paratroopers from 1967, the liberators of the wall from 67 joined us this month because they felt the wall needs liberating again. And after we finished, really, this was after we were all done. Policemen from the local police from Tachanat Bet Eliyahu grabbed 10 of us, a mother and daughter, a pregnant woman, 2 rabbis who were supposed to meet the ambassador of the United States in Israel. I couldn't have given the police a better list than who they picked. And the 10 of us were taken to the police station. We were detained. Our fingerprints were taken. We were investigated and warned. And I must tell you, of this now is the 43rd detention of women at the wall, and none of these cases ended up with a charge. And in fact, there is no guilt. When we asked for, so what happened to the case from 2010 and what happened to the case in 2011, we're getting a letter from the police saying the case was closed. There is no guilt. He'ader hashma, no guilt. So,
but you must have realised when you went to the wall that was likely to happen if there have been so many similar incidents in the past.
Yes, well, I thought we were immune this time because the paratroopers were looking there, and everybody, those paratroopers that liberated the wall in '67 are hailed as Israeli heroes. And you know what? The police waited till they were gone. It was when the last paratrooper actually left the wall that the police pounced and took 10 of us.
Good evening, Anat. It's Moshe Freedman here. I must say that in the first instance, I admire and really respect your desire to pray. I wish that every Jew had the desire to connect to God and to pray in the same way that you do. However, I do feel that your actions, while I understand your sensitivities and your desire to pray in the way that you wish to, that your actions are rather antagonistic and confrontational. And I worry that, as much as I may disagree with your religious views, that what you're actually doing is harming your position and galvanizing the very extreme elements in the Orthodox world who are pushing an agenda to sort of, stop you from doing this.
Anat, so you respond, and I know that Laura's keen to come in as well.
I want to know, what would you suggest? What is your advice? What should we do?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. The sensitivities within Israel are very complex. I lived in Jerusalem for 5 years. I also prayed at the Western Wall. I know what it's like there. I understand Natan Sharansky is involving himself, but there are correct channels to go through. This is going to be perceived as an antagonistic protest rather than a Jewish woman's desire to pray in the way that she wants to.
Rabbi, tell me, what are the correct channels?
Again, I don't know. I'm just a rabbi who lives in London. There must be better ways of protesting and better ways of doing this than causing, a disturbance, which ultimately is why...
So here's the news, Rabbi. I'm an activist in Jerusalem, 14 years a city councillor in this town, re-elected by tens of thousands of Jerusalemites who know I can do something. Let me tell you, this is the one way left.
So I would say something different. As a rabbi, I want as many of our members to get involved in Jewish life. And when wearing a prayer shawl is an antagonistic action, that is not my definition of an antagonistic action. Last month, the month before last, 2 of our 18-year-olds were detained who are on a year scheme with us. And I was proud of them. Proud that they went to the wall. They cared enough. All of them, girls and boys, in fact, including my son, went. And the antagonistic action was to put on a prayer shawl. When you go to the Western Wall, do you wear a prayer shawl?
Let's answer that after the news, because that music means we're going to have to take a quick news break. But wherever you're listening around the world, if you've got any questions you want to put to the rabbis or indeed to Anat, facebook.com/World Have Your Say, and we'll carry on talking about this in the next couple of minutes.
We've heard the news from the BBC. Now it's your turn.
You can post on facebook.com/World Have Your Say.
Or get in touch via Twitter at BBC_WHYS.
Welcome to World Have Your Say.
Hello, I'm Chloe Tilley. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. The arrests of Jewish women praying at Jerusalem's Western Wall whilst wearing prayer shawls and traditional skull caps, defying Orthodox rules, has started a debate about whether religion should evolve, should change. On this programme on Monday, we spoke to Catholics about whether their church should now choose a modernising Pope after Pope Benedict announced he's stepping down. Many saw this as a compromise. Well, from the extremes of the Taliban in Afghanistan to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, is religion religion in its purest form when it remains unchanged? Or should a religion reflect the changes in society? Joseph in Uganda has posted at Facebook, God's issues cannot be discussed and vetted by man, we simply follow. Sohan in Kuwait says religious leaders with political ambitions are the curse for mankind. It's more destructive than nuclear bombs. And Alan in Ohio says, how does anyone know what God's law is? The books used by all religions were written by human beings. This whole argument about religions not changing with time is ridiculous. All religions have changed many, many times over the centuries.
This is Irene,
Eddie, and Nicholas
from Western Kenya
on BBC World Have Your Say. You can join the program by calling the country code 442031624242.
Still with us is Anat Hoffman, who is Executive Director of the Israel Religious Action Centre. Also with us is Rabbi Dr. Moshe Freedman from the United Synagogue. And in full flow before the news, I stopped Rabbi Laura Janner-Klausner from the Movement for Reform Judaism. Please carry on the point you were making.
I just wanted to ask, when you go to the wall, you are allowed as a man to wear a prayer shawl and to pray how you want. And women who want to pray are restricted. They're restricted not just in a prayer shawl, but it's the beginning of areas that we see of gender segregation. And that's what really concerns me. I am concerned that women are not allowed to sing aloud in public spaces. I am concerned about segregation on buses. I am concerned about women's voices. You're a scientist. Women's voices at scientific conferences where they present a paper, they are not allowed to speak. So this is a very representative moment. If we cannot wear a prayer shawl as a way of serving God, like men do, and it accompanies a whole increase of gender segregation, this is wrong.
Well, I take all of your points. I think they're very important points indeed. The truth is that I can wear a prayer shawl when I go to the Western Wall. That's true. But it's very interesting that the prayer shawl has become such a central part of this issue, when historically and in actuality today, there is no need to wear a prayer shawl in order to access God. One never needs to wear a prayer shawl to pray as such. And I'm curious, and I don't mean this in a confrontational way, but why has this become such a big issue for women?
It's not. The big issue for us is Torah. We want to read Torah. We want to read the Holy Scroll of the Torah at the Western Wall. In fact, Rabbi, I would trade you. I would wear a prayer shawl under my garment so no one can see it if you allow me 1 hour a month to be able to open the Torah scroll and read Parashat Rosh Chodesh with the group of Women of the Wall.
Right.
What do you say?
I wouldn't be able to allow you. It's again, as we spoke about before, Anat, it's not up to me. The historical fact is that the plaza of the Western Wall has always been governed by Orthodox authorities, and I think if you want to change that, then there are channels by which you can do so.
Actually, that's not true. When the wall was captured between June and April '68, it was not governed by any Orthodox authority.
But the reality is it is now, and if one wants to change something, I think there are better ways of doing it. I also want to address
you can't tell me which way, please.
But Anat, that's because I'm not in Israel at the moment. I don't understand the right. There are politicians involved. As I said, Natan Sharansky is involved. He is a very good person, and there are places around the area of the temple. Of Temple Mount, where you are allowed egalitarian
offering me other
services.
Walls.
I want to come back to something else.
But Anat, your access to the temple area is granted for egalitarian services by Robinson's Arch. Now, I'm not saying that it's perfect. It's not a perfect solution, but there is a compromise. And I respect your desire to pray in the way that you want to. But you also have to respect the fact that the majority of people who go to the Western Wall are Orthodox, and they do have sensitivities as well. And whether you disagree with them or not, you should also be sensitive to their needs.
Well, let me just ask you a couple of points, because in that answer there, you used two words. You used change and use the word compromise. And those are two things that people are talking about around this issue, about whether religion should change, whether it should evolve. And indeed, as I was saying in the introduction, many of the Catholics we were talking to on the programme on Monday saw any idea of modernising the Catholic Church as being a compromise.
Right.
Do you yourself feel that religions should evolve, should change, should modernise as the world changes, as society changes?
So it's an excellent question. Orthodoxy does modernise, it does change, it does adapt to the modern world, but it adapts in a way that is carefully considered. it applies itself to the modern world with change that is managed properly, so that not only do we change to adapt to the modern world, but we bring the traditions of the past with us and make sure that we don't abrogate any laws or disturb the beauty of Judaism that we hold to be critically important. So we do change.
And where would you say the change should come from? Both Laura and Anat. Laura first. Should it be sort of from the ground up, if you like, or should it come from the top of your church?
Both. It should come from synagogues, it should come from people, and it should come from rabbis. And one way in which Judaism is very different than other religions is around the authority of the rabbi. We're not intermediaries. Rabbis help develop law and help our communities develop and change. For me, compromise is a great word. When you have an argument, the skill of growing up is teaching people how to compromise, how to move forward. And there are issues around gender. There are issues around equal marriage. There are issues that, when Moshe, absolutely right, that Judaism has evolved, but there are lines in the ground that are excluding people who need a voice. So I think it needs to come from people. And one way that Jewish law does change is from people and from custom, and not giving people a law that the majority cannot uphold.
Anat?
Well, the name of Jewish law in Hebrew is halacha, which comes from the word halach, which means to walk. Halacha, Jewish law, is that moves. So obviously we come from a tradition that moves. And I think Women of the Wall are in the best traditions of women who misbehaved somewhat in Jewish tradition and made some changes, positive changes that we now applaud. For example, Hannah, our mother who stood and prayed for the first time, the Amida, the silent prayer, and of course the rabbi of the location immediately told her, get out of here, you're drunk. But of course today we know that she actually gave the Jewish people one of the most important prayers. I want to just say something positive about Orthodoxy, because Orthodoxy has 50 shades of black in it, and there are Orthodox women. In fact, I'd say the bulk of Women of the Wall are Orthodox women who wake up in the morning, and together with the Reform and Conservative women, we pray together. We're probably the only group in the world of all Jewish denominations that not only pray together, we wrote a siddur, a prayer book together. We argued about every word. It took us 6 years to publish, but the first Rosh Chodesh siddur in the world is the Women of the Wall siddur.
Anat, I want to jump in at this point because we've got other guests who want to join the conversation, want to speak to you and want to speak to Laura and want to speak to Moshe. Wycliffe in Kenya has posted at Facebook, why can't we simply follow what's in the Bible? I don't understand why the church interpretation of the Bible is changing. If anything, religion is not a democracy. You follow laws dogmatically. You cannot amend what's in the Quran or the Bible. It ceases to be God's authority and becomes a man-made constitution. Do you agree? You can pick up the phone. You can call us, country code 4420 31 62 42 42. Laura's shaking her head as she sits opposite me here in the World Have Your Say studio. Let me introduce you to Christian Weisner, who is spokesman for a Roman Catholic pro-reform group in Germany called We Are Church, and also Professor Tariq Ramadan, who's Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at Oxford University. Tariq Ramadan, first of all, do you think that religion should evolve? Can it evolve?
Yes, I think by definition, if religion is not evolving, it's not adapted to human beings. And as believers, we all think that it's coming from God, and God knows what human beings are going to deal with when it comes to history, geography, cultures. The question is not if it should evolve, is what should evolve and in which way. So when we deal with revelations and scriptural sources, this is not going to change. The texts are going to stay the text as they are. And for example, from an Islamic viewpoint, the prophetic traditions are not going to change. What is going to change is the minds and the understanding of the readers, because they are facing new challenges. So we should reform, for example, when it comes to Islam, the Muslim mind, when it comes to reading the texts and facing new challenges. So The first thing is to reform our understanding. It's important. The second is to differentiate between the immutable principles and the changeable implementations. Because if we are faithful to principles, by definition, we should understand that history is pushing people to, in order to remain faithful to principles, to adapt, think, have a critical thinking on the implementation of some of the principles. Of course, we are not going to...
Isn't one of the problems, though, I've been doing this programme long enough to know that whenever somebody quotes scripture to you, someone will quote something back that contradicts it. And if you can go into almost any religious book around the world, you can find something that you can relate to. And isn't that the problem? That people interpret different elements, and that's why you sometimes have fundamental Islam compared to a more moderate, shall we say?
No, I think it's the same with everything. You know, history can be quoted and understood and used to prove everything and anything. So I think that this is the way we human beings are. So the point is, when it comes to scriptural sources, and it's true because we are dealing with the sacred here, is to challenge this understanding. So at the same time, it's a problem, it's a challenge, but this challenge is the very essence of religion, because we need these intra-community discussions and challenge. You know, when someone is coming with the text, you also have to deal with the principles, the understanding, the objective, the spirit of the text. So what could be divisions within should be dynamic in the diversity of interpretations. So I think, yes, it's a challenge, it's difficult, and the problem, you know, it's not the problem is not the text, is not the Quran or the prophetic tradition or the Torah and the Bible. The problem is the reader. But the problem is the reader because the problem is human beings. We have to deal with human beings. And at the end of the day, the most important challenges that we have when it comes to philosophy, humanism, is dogmatic minds.
Okay, take a breath. Let's bring in Christian Weisner, who is spokesman for the Roman Catholic Pro-Reform Group in Germany, because I know both the rabbis here are desperate to jump in as well. Christian, make your point, if you would. Do you think that that religion should be changing, should be evolving?
I think religion has always changed. And this discussion is so interesting to me because I'm a Roman Catholic Christ from Reform, and I see so many similarities to Judaism, to Islam. And I think in all these three religions, which are based on Father Abraham, which are monotheism, I think they all have a domination of the male gender. And I think that is not the way God wants our world to be. I think that is really a problem that has to be overcome. And looking back at the Roman Catholic Church, at Christianity, there were changes all over the time. So we had the Inquisition, we were for slavery. There were times when the theologians told us that women and children had no soul at all. I think there is some development, and I think that is very important.
Well, this is a wonderful discussion, but I don't agree about the reforming the mind. It's about acts that need to reform. It's about practice that needs to reform. And religion needs to continue. The other thing I want to talk to is about this male-female. There is male and female in God. We have all this language of God. The most indwelling of God is this idea of it's actually in the feminine. So to differentiate between men and women is not the way forward, neither for orthodoxy nor for reform. We may differentiate in what we can do, but in our image of God, it's not meant to be differentiated. This is a very different idea. And I also want to say that Judaism is very different because we don't have a pope. We don't have an authority figure like that. So what's going on now when a group of people, a conclave of people are choosing the head of the religion? We don't have that. In fact, here in Britain, when the Orthodox chief rabbi was just chosen, it was done by committee and a job description and an interview, and that's how it should be.
I mean, Laura, can I just pick on one point to do with male and female? You're absolutely right. God is, of course, not only male, because that would imply that God lacks a feminine side. God is both male and female, or neither, or however you want to put it. But men and women are not the same, in the same way that physically we are different and we have different physical needs. We have different spiritual needs as well, and that's why there are differences within Orthodoxy.
Okay. So I completely disagree that men and women have different spiritual needs. What are spiritual needs? For closeness, for uphold, for thanksgiving, for healing. These are not differentiated by our bodies. And the more that we know about people, we normally know about gender and sexuality and psychology, the more that we know that people are born on a spectrum. So my assumption is that your need for love, care, health, family is exactly the same as mine.
But Laura, they're all physical things. Those things are all physical.
Love
I'm talking
and care?
about something... No. Absolutely. But there are spiritual realities that reflect physical differences.
Okay, I do not agree that there is a spiritual reality that is gender-defined.
Yeah. Can we say something here?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just one thing that I wanted to say first, just to react to what you say, because you said that you don't agree with the it's in the interpretations and the minds. Of course, the point is that when you change, you evolve with your understanding of the scriptural sources. Of course, the impact will be to have new implementation and new understanding. And it's clear that, for example, when you have a critical read of the text beyond the cultural projection, you come with something which is another understanding of the text. And this is the way we are implementing. So in order to have new understandings and new implementation, you need to reform the minds. You need to reform the way we read the text with new insight, with new understanding. This is the first point. The second point is about what you are saying. I really don't think that the spiritual needs of men and women are different. I think that this is something, first, we don't know, but I really don't think, I think in essence we have the same spiritual needs. And very often in our religions, the discourse and the traditional discourse on understanding was very masculine, very male-oriented. And this is where we come to speak on religion about the roles of men and women, and we end up missing the most fundamental discussion about the spiritual needs of both. It's not to speak about women as wife and daughter and mother, but women as women. So womanhood is missing in our discussion.
Well, I don't think it is. I think that within Orthodoxy, the role of women has changed dramatically for the good.
Not the role. This is exactly my point. Not the role. The essence of spirituality is essential here.
Well, I agree that there is an essence that is important and that has changed. But I go back. I think there are differences in the way we understand the word spiritual.
I'd love to know what spiritual needs you have that I don't have.
Well,
because
very simple.
Of your gender.
Very simple. Let me give you an example. You and I both know the story in the Bible of the sin of the 10 spies. Right, where 12 spies were sent into the land of Israel, and 10 came back and gave a negative report. Each one of those spies, of course, were men. And that's how Orthodox Judaism defines the concept of being quorate for a prayer service requiring 10 men. Now, in the Reform world, correct me if I'm wrong, but women are also able to make up that.
Absolutely.
10. Now,
adult women,
of course. Now, the irony is that the reason that 10 men make up that group that forms a community is not because of a positive thing, but because by doing so we correct that sin that was committed by 10 men.
Okay.
So the idea of women having access to that...
This is a faulty assumption from my point of view.
Can I ask a question
saying,
from
hang
Jerusalem?
on, Anat.
Very quickly,
it's
Anat,
a faulty assumption that
guest.
men need more corrective behavioural control than women.
Anat, come in quickly.
I have a question for the two rabbis in London. If the two of you had this evening to discuss the Western Wall and find a way for the women of the wall to be there and to do the least injury to the feelings of others, do you think the two of you could actually come up with a practical solution?
Well, Anna, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to jump in and ask you to continue this conversation off air, only because I do want to bring in another guest, and I want to continue looking at this idea of whether religion should evolve, whether religion should change, and whether that's a benefit to everyone involved in that religion or just specific groups within that religion. Let's bring in Ruth Gledhill, who's been waiting very patiently on the phone. And apologies, Ruth, religious correspondent of the Times newspaper in London, because you were meant to be joining us in the studio here, and I know there have been a few problems, so I do apologise for that. But Ruth, you've been listening. What would you like to say?
I think religions have to adapt in order to survive in whichever age they're in. But they have to adapt in such a way that they keep their tradition, the key bits of their tradition, intact. And Judaism is a fantastically successful religion in the way it's done this, because the Bible, the Torah, has remained unchanged, but the commentaries that go with the Bible are developed for every age through rabbinic scholarship. And this means that even the most apparently archaic scripts in the Torah can be interpreted to have a relevance for the modern era. And I think many religions could learn from that example. So texts don't have to be taken literally as if they apply exactly as they say to the present age, but that literal text can be interpreted for the present age in a way that makes it relevant. And I think that when we see religions now struggling to adapt or not to adapt to modern secular mores, one of the problems they encounter is how to make that same interpretation in a way that's acceptable to as many of their members as possible.
Well, I love what you said, Ruth. Thank you so much. Come our way. That's completely fantastic. It is true that we're evolving in every age, and we need to. And also that we need to keep what is key in tradition. And I want to say the question comes back to this issue that Tarek raised about what's in the mind and what's in the practice. So what we know about developing sexuality, gender differences, cannot feed into our practice. Has to feed into our practice so that we are continually developing, that we are rooted in tradition, that we develop slowly, we evolve, but we understand now that men and women are equal, and therefore we need to change our practice accordingly.
Let's bring Christian in at this point, because there's lots of issues here that are really resonating for the Catholic Church at the moment, a real sort of turning point, many people would think. Pope Benedict has sent out what some people would say as an implicit message that they need to bring in a younger pope. They need to say that this is not the job for an old man at 85. He's struggling, and actually a younger man needs to come in. There was talk even on our programme on Monday about the prospect in the future of a woman pope. There were raised eyebrows in the studio here. But Christian, for the Catholic religion, how important and how difficult is this time linking with tradition but equally pushing forward?
I think it is really a historic moment, and you could see from the behavior and from the decision of Pope Benedict to resign, that was allowed to, according to church law, but was in another way, it was a taboo. It wasn't practiced for 700 years. So Pope Benedict showed us it is possible to change the rules. And I think we have to wait some more 100 years or so to get a female pope. But I think it's now in the Roman Catholic Church, it's not only to exchange the person on top of the hierarchy in the Vatican. I think we also have to change our attitudes to the gender question and also to the question how we organize ourselves. And I think really in Germany, we have the experience, if church is not changing, then you will get split up. We had the Reformation some 500 years ago. So I think the tension between tradition and looking into the future and adjusting the religion, I think it is a tension, but the tension is something good. It gives us strength and helps us to find new ideas to tell the gospel of God to the people. I think so. We have to grow, and religion has to grow, and religion has to reorganize. Otherwise, there will be another Reformation.
Ruth, is there a danger, as Christian says there, a danger, particularly if we look at the Catholic Church, of splitting up, of tension, particularly when there's issues surrounding women in the clergy, for example?
I think the most important thing is that people are able to continue talking, and that vocalised dissent is listened to and not silenced, because I think splits are avoided when talking is allowed to continue. So as long as these issues are on the table, and people are able to shout about them, as the Church of England is very good at doing, then I think that long-term things will move forward. It is rather tragic, in my view, that back in the 1960s, the bishops of the Church of England were actually at the fore of supporting the decriminalisation of homosexual sex. And then they seem to be advocates of, progressive change while not abandoning tradition. And now the Church is really struggling to find a way to do that with the present debate over gay marriage. And it seems to me that the Church of England in particular has lost its way in terms of how to handle dissent and marry it metaphorically and literally to the mores of the modern age. And actually, I think the Catholic Church is doing it better.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming months. Of course, we're being told that hopefully a conclave will decide on a new pope before Easter or around Easter time. Thank you to all of our guests. Thank you for getting in touch with us. Facebook.com/World Have Your Say is the place to carry on the conversation. I will be back here at the same time tomorrow to speak with you then. Thank you ever so much for listening.
People,